Hey guys, I just did a really good interview with Mark McCrindle. Well, it's less of an interview and more of just him teaching. Mark runs a large research firm in Australia. He's a committed believer, and I got him to talk about how to lead Australians in this unprecedented time. And he's got some amazing stats and some amazing knowledge on the things that we can be doing right now, but also how to prepare, kind of looking forward and forecasting and looking at the trends of what's to come post-COVID. Anyway, dial in right now, watch Mark, he's got a lot of gold for you. Well guys, thank you so much for watching. This is exciting for me. I'm about to do a bit of an interview and you're going to hear from Mark McCrindle, who has his own firm. He's a research firm called McCrindle Research. And I actually met Mark at a Gospel Crusade event earlier this year. I think we had passed a few times before that, but actually got to chat earlier this year. And he's got an amazing amount of knowledge around trends and where we're going. And I just reached out to him and said, "Hey guys, what can we do about getting some COVID-related trends? What can we expect? Where are we going?" And he said, "Yeah, I've got a great topic." So before we get into the topic, Mark, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and a bit about your firm?
Well, thanks, Wes. Delight to be chatting with you, and all that you do with the Kingdom business is fantastic. And I really resonate with that because we want to run a business here that's having impacts and making a difference for people and equipping mainstream society and organizations, but ministries and Christian churches as well through our research. We spend a lot of our time running market research, surveys, in-depth interviews, focus groups, that sort of thing, so that we can help our clients and the broader society just understand what the lay of the land is from a consumer, from a community, from a market perception approach. We then do a lot of demographic analysis and demographic modeling, so we get a sense as to where are things going and how is the growth impacting and what are the different generations or the different segments are producing and what are the emerging attitudes we need to be across. We do a lot of big data analytics, we do a lot of data visualization, and also just from a strategy perspective, help organizations understand not just where things are at, but where they're headed from a trends perspective so they can be prepared for what's next.
Yeah, that's so good. And I noticed, I've got nothing to compare you to, but you put out these really well-produced graphics. And I find them to be so good in terms of our ability to digest, what is actually quite complex, brought down to something quite simple. And, I've seen quite a few of those cards over the years, and I think that they're just fantastic to be able to get a snapshot of what's going on. I'm sure there's 1,000 hours of work that goes into making it simple, but I really appreciate that. Now, I also noticed married with 5 children or 4 children. What did I saw online?
5 kids, yes, that's
5
right.
kids,
Yeah,
yeah.
well, yes.
I
Yeah, that's a
noticed
lot of fun.
I noticed some photos of quite a long time ago. I just had a quick look through social, and you had some photos taken out in the woods, and your kids were really young. I think it was about 2010 or something. Like it was a long time ago.
Just had our youngest born then. So yes, so it's a lot of fun on the home front, and particularly in a work from home environment, it just adds to the chaos, but also the fun, as I'm sure we're all finding. Multiple people working from home, kids studying from home, chaos everywhere, but it's a delight
Yeah.
amidst this challenge as well.
Of course. So your topic is leading teams in unprecedented times. Australia amidst COVID-19. So that's enough from me. Hey, why don't we'll hand over to you. You come and teach us about what we can learn from this and how we can lead teams, and I'm just going to kind of sit back and listen and learn from you too.
Well, thanks a lot, Wes. Just great to have this topic to present on and what unprecedented times we are in, and all the more important at a time like this for leaders to step up and lead. And that requires us to understand our teams and the context in which we are leading so that we can step forward and give that strong leadership and direction that people look for in uncertain times. It was at the World Economic Forum recently that Justin Trudeau said, "The pace of change has never been this fast, and it will never be this slow again." And I think that really sums up this era that, wow, we are moving at pace, and yet it's not going to slow down. The pace that we are seeing at the moment is speeding up, if anything. I had a Gen Y share recently, and I've got it here on the slide. She said, I've now lived through 5 decades: the 1980s, the 90s, the 2000s, the 2010s, and March and April 2020. It was like a decade in itself, and I'm sure we've all felt that. A lot has gone on in this era. So, wow, 2020, it was the year that offered such expectation, such opportunity, and well, it's been not quite what we all thought. I'm sure we can all relate a little bit to SpongeBob here in this image. He's got his 2020 business strategy all ready to go. And there it goes into the fire. Let's start over, because it was not predicted that we would have such a start as this to the year. I mean, just think back to late February when the ASX 200 was at record levels above the 7,100 mark. And here we are a couple of months later at 5,400, having lost a quarter of its value in that period of time. That is the volatility, the uncertainty, the disruption that we're living in at this moment. Now, this decade has brought that anyway, but this year has really highlighted that. And so when it comes to our strategy and our business planning, it used to be linear. It used to be sequential and structured. We'd look at where we're at, we would make decisions, we would set forward plans, we would track towards the future. But that approach doesn't work in these sorts of times. Think of the words that define these times. And it highlights that we're not moving to the future, but in so many ways, the future is coming at us. And it is bringing with it this disruption and this uncertainty. We've perhaps heard the term VUCA: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. And you add to that what we need in this time: adaptation and innovation. We're seeing exponential charts and graphs. We're seeing and hearing much about unprecedented, perhaps the unprecedented use of the word unprecedented. That's this era. And it has created a sense of change fatigue. As we were closing out 2019 and the decade that brought us, we surveyed Australians and asked them this question: how do you feel about the amount of change society has experienced in the last decade? Technological, demographic, social change. Well, it was a big decade of change, and Australians were fatigued by it. You can see on the graph here that for every person that said positive about the change, even more said concerned. For every person who said energized and empowered, even more said overwhelmed and fatigued. That's what we were experiencing anyway as we were leading into 2020. And now with these last few months, it's at a whole new level. I'm sure we can all relate to this grandmother here who was presented with a new remote control with lots of buttons for that TV, a bit overwhelmed by it all. Her young grandson brought a solution with a little bit of masking tape, as you can see, and solved her problem. Not a bad solution to reduce the complexity, but that doesn't work in our life and society and these times. The times we have are the times we have to deal with. And so it is important for leaders to understand this context, to get a sense as to where things are going, and to lead their teams effectively through it. The ABS Bureau of Statistics has been conducting some great research over the last couple of weeks as we move through this COVID crisis. And this one highlights the impacts. Most businesses have been impacted significantly already just in these last 8 weeks. And they've responded through cutting staff and through readjusting rent. You can see here, 2/3 of businesses have seen already a reduction in cash flow. And we know that a lot of the impacts are downline, but already more than 2/3 have felt the pain. Only 4% have seen an increase, by the way. So you get a sense as to where it's going. Almost half have changed staff arrangements in terms of stand downs or reduced hours, relocations. More than 1/3 have already renegotiated a property rent or lease. So you get a sense as to the impacts on businesses instantly that we have faced in this time with a long way to go. So as leaders, we need to understand this context and think about how we're going to respond. Now, It's all been brought about, of course, because of the health crisis, but the health crisis leads to a financial crisis. Let's think about COVID-19 for a moment and look at how we're traveling here in Australia. And we've heard the term a lot, flatten the curve, and we have flattened it superbly. You can see the trajectory we are on here, and that is a model textbook case in pandemic management. And we share that flat line with some of the other nations you can see there, South Korea and New Zealand, Taiwan in that impressive situation. You've got others that haven't managed it as well. The start was pretty good in Singapore, but you can see that curve has risen a little bit. Japan was looking okay, but has had a second impact. And of course, Italy, we've been watching the challenges there, but at the top of the chart in terms of slower to flatten that curve, the US and the UK. So we've been very blessed here in Australia with a great response and great leadership. And it's come about because of this. Aussies are complying with the public health guidelines. 98% have practiced social distancing. You know, the best models, the best case models, build in a 90% compliance. So we're well above that, and that's why we're seeing such a model response. 88% have avoided public spaces or events. So we really are managing how we handle it as individuals, going to the shops less, avoiding those trips out. It has impacted all things, and even Where's Wally is a little bit easier to manage these days because he's the only guy on the street to spot in an era of social distancing. Well, the result of all of this has led to this impressive flattening of that bell curve. You know, this graph looks at the daily new confirmed cases, and you can see we saw our peaks in late March and into early April, but since then it's been a great news story. Now you get a sense as to what will be produced here as you look at the May data, and that is a long tail. And so it's not as though job done and dusted with COVID-19. That tail that we see through May will continue on. What worries public health officials, and I'm sure we're getting this communication as we get across the information, is the worries about further waves. If we look at the Spanish flu, this is how it flowed. There was that initial wave that was the big focus, and then people thought it was done and dusted, but the second wave was bigger than the first, and the subsequent wave significant as well. Can we get the second waves in Australia? Well, we can. In fact, you look at the Tasmanian data, and that looks pretty much like a second wave to me. And it follows that situation that we often have with these pandemics, with the second wave bigger than the first. So that's what's keeping the public health officials up late at night. That's why we're seeing very conservative releasing of the lockdown or restrictions, and so it will take a while for us to emerge from this as a society. Now, if we look at the Spanish flu waves for a moment, you can see that they were 4 months peak to peak between the first and the second wave, and another 4 months between the second and the third. So there's going to be great conservatism from the epidemiologists as we manage this because of the delay that can take place between resurgence of the impacts. And it's a little surprised to find this ABS study that Australians are concerned, 2 in 3 concerned or very concerned about their personal health during COVID. And what's, I think, remarkable about this graph is that there is hardly any difference between the level of concern amongst the over 65s and the level of concern amongst the rest of adults, the 18 to 64s. Regardless of age, there is high concern. And that is why Australians have taken this upon themselves to lock down, to self-isolate, to reduce their public interactions, and to comply by those public health instructions of hand washing and social distancing, etc. Now, the other challenge in all of this is that we are moving into our winter and our flu season, whereas in much of the world, the Northern Hemisphere, they're, of course, moving out of it. So let's have a look at flu for a moment and how that's played out in Australia over the last 6 years. You can see that flu cases, well, let's have a look at last year, which was a horror season, and it was peaking, our flu, in July. Now, what would be a bad outcome is if the COVID situation is overlapping with a big flu outbreak here in Australia, and that's just going to cause further challenge in terms of demand on public health facilities, in terms of reduced health across the population generally, and in terms of increased fear and anxiety as there's sniffles all over the place. Keep in mind, if we look back to the 2015 flu season, we didn't peak then until late August, and so July to August is when our traditional flu season peaks, and that's why we're going to see some restrictions in place as well, just until we get over that challenge also. But have a look at the results for 2020 at the moment, and our flu season, lowest flu cases ever recorded. So the impacts of this social isolation on COVID have had significant impacts on the flu as well, and that will save more lives than even the great outcomes we've had around COVID. Let's put up some data around that for a moment, and to put things in perspective, as of today, there are just under 7,000 COVID-19 cases, and there have been 97 deaths recorded. Each of those, of course, a tragedy. Let's look at, we're talking flu, let's look at last year's flu numbers for a moment. And so last year there were more than 313,000 flu cases in Australia, and 97 deaths from COVID, 3,100 deaths from flu last year alone. And the death profile was of an older age group, as we're seeing with COVID as well. So that's why, with the unintended benefits of the lockdown from COVID on flu, we'll save many more lives from flu this year than even we saved from COVID. So it's having some positive impacts across the board. So we understand the measures for it. Australians have been compliant with it. They get it. They see what's happening firsthand in other countries, and so they are being model citizens in the response. And we as leaders need to keep that in mind, and not, I guess, push staff or people further than they're getting the advice from around public health, and really, lead that public health measure and message because of the impacts, the positive impacts that we are seeing. Well, let's look at some of the attitude and sentiment of Australians, and then how we can respond to it as leaders. We've put out some multiple studies in this in April, and another one this month looking at COVID-19, and there's different studies. We've done one for the education sector, one for not-for-profits, and one for mainstream businesses, and grab those reports. Are freely available, and we'll put the links up for you. So we asked Australians from this survey of more than 1,000 Australians, how are you feeling about the future? And you can see that more than a third of Australians are feeling extremely or very uncertain about the future. But probably what's most remarkable about this study is that the uncertainty was higher in the younger generations than the old. More than half of all Generation Zs, those in their 20s, were feeling extremely or very uncertain about their future, compared to less than a third of the older generation. Around 1 in 4 of the seniors. So there is a benefit that comes from experience. Our older generations have been around the block a few more times. They've had more challenges or crises or recessions that they have had to deal with. And so they've got a broader sense as to the context into which this sits. That's where a multi-generation can come into play in our churches, communities, and organizations. The younger people are feeling more uncertain, but the older people can go off for more confidence. The older people are feeling less resilient from a health perspective, but the younger generation feeling less resilient from an emotional perspective. And across the generations, we have some great solutions and some comfort that can be brought to pass. This question here, how have Australia's leaders responded amidst this COVID challenge? And you can see the results there. Nearly 8 in 10 believe Australia has responded as well or better than the other nations, and the data bears that out. So we asked Australians, well, what are the important qualities of a leader in a time of crisis? And you can see the key responses here that we ought to adopt as leaders as well. Number one, be completely open and honest with the sharing of information. We've seen our leaders do that at a national and state level, and they've been well rewarded in terms of support by the Australian public for that. I saw the press conference of Prime Minister Scott Morrison recently that was broadcast live, and one of the journalists said, "Oh, you've just shared this modelling of what's happening. Is there more modelling that you can share with us?" He said, "Hey, you've got everything we've got. There's nothing we're holding back from you." And that's what Australians respond well to, and our teams will as well. Let's be open and transparent and honest with sharing the information. Let's not try to gild it, but put it out there. Second, you can see, be prepared to make tough calls, make them early, and back yourself as leader. And we've seen our leaders do that as well, and it's been well rewarded in terms of Australians getting on board that messaging. Yes, leaders have to make the tough calls, but if we're going to make them early, and go with it. There's never a perfect playbook for these things. Unprecedented is a word that we use meaningfully in this time. So as leaders, let's step out, let's make the calls based on the best available information, and make them in a timely way rather than double guessing, and move forward with that direction. Our teams will reward us for it. Third on the list, lead with strength and communicate confidence. Now that's what our teams need, is a leader to step forward and to communicate that we will get through this. That's what we're seeing being modeled by our national leaders as well. And it's textbook crisis leadership. We're hearing messages like, "Hey, we're on a bridge, we're going to cross over the bridge to the other side. Yes, we're in hibernation now, but we will emerge from this. This too will pass." That's the sort of messaging that gives confidence to the followers. And we need to make sure we're communicating that sort of message, sharing the vision. And vision, it's a word there it's something you can see. So through our word pictures, our metaphors, our case studies, or the vision that we're casting, let's project that picture of where things will be, and that we can lead teams there. A fourth on the list, give voice to the experts and follow their lead and advice. We've got to get the research, get the evidence, and base our decisions on the best evidence that we have. And while they are all factors around leadership of strength and decision-making and communication, there's a second category of the leader, and that's the EQ, not just the IQ, the emotional intelligence. And that's what Australians said was a key number 5 for leaders: show compassion and empathy. We need to show that we can relate, that we're feeling the pain, that we're leading from within, from the front lines, rather than from the parapet on high. Our teams will respond to that. If they're feeling the pain, we need to share that, and I think share more of that pain around salary reductions, or around the extra work, or around whatever those challenges that we all have to bear are. Now, we've seen in this time not only the tough times, but a lot of the best of the Aussie spirit coming through as well. This hashtag caremongering, as Australians have got out there and cared for their communities, or this one, viral kindness, as we've had a lot of Australians make a difference for those around us. And that's the realm of leaders, to inspire that sort of response from our teams and in our organisations. This is not the year to shoot the lights out with our revenues. Just surviving from a cash flow perspective is the focus. It's the year to, I think, build the relationships with our clients and our customers, so that when we're through all of this, they will reward that loyalty, that support, and that care. We've seen it with the gyms saying to their clients, "Hey, we don't need this gym equipment. You take it. We trust you. Bring it back when we're through all of this, but you use it in the meantime." We're seeing businesses, while there's been some opportunism, others are saying the opposite. We're going to cut the prices on this. We're going to make this available to those in need. We're making donations here. We're giving back to our community. I know in our business, a lot of B2B businesses are doing it. We're saying, "Look, we just want to run some research for you, deliver you these services. We'll sort out the tab later on, but we know you need it. It's a crisis. Let's get it done, and we'll sort the finances out on the other side." It's that sort of approach that'll win loyalty for the long term, and that's the vision we need at this time. I put down here this statement we wrote in this report: great leaders have not only a vision for their organisation, but a vision for their community. And that's the impact that they think. That's what kingdom businesses do, isn't it? They invest in the communities where they are planted. They make a difference with what's in their hand, their tools, their opportunities, their finances, to bless those around them, clients, the community, and beyond. So we asked this question of Australians: when will things be back to normal? And I think we see the wisdom of crowds here. We consistently find in research that if you ask an informed crowd, you get a better answer than if you just ask individuals. And so the collective wisdom of Australians on this, as you can see, is brace ourselves in for an extended period. Almost half are saying 7 months or more in terms of how long we've got to get through all this before we're back to some sense of normal. And even if the health crisis passes over the next couple of months, the economic crisis will be here for a while. So we need to, as leaders, brace ourselves for the long game, not the sprint, and be prepared to manage through this extended period. So what is the sentiment of Australians in this change of time? How are we feeling at the moment? Here are the top 5 responses of Australians amidst COVID-19. The number one emotion is anxious. 45% of Australians say that sums up how they're feeling at the moment. Number 2 is frustrated. More than a third feeling that. They had the plans and it's come crumbling down. They had the goals, maybe personal goals, people getting married, people with their various celebrations, booking tickets for travel or trips, catch up with family or others, and it's come to naught. Frustration is very strong, and as business leaders, I'm sure we feel a bit of that. But channel that into innovation and adaptation. Third response here, vulnerable, say almost a third of Australians. More than 1 in 4 are feeling scared, but I'm happy with number 5 on the list. More than 1 in 4 are feeling hopeful as well. And that is good to see. And when we broke it down by generation, we again found the older generations are setting a good lead here. They're less likely to feel anxious and overwhelmed and more likely to feel hopeful, with it in the top 3 for the older generation. So we can offer comfort across the generations and through our experience. Well, when we asked Australians how they've felt COVID, it's been in ways, but one of the most visceral senses that it's been experienced has been at the shopping centre, at the supermarket, with those empty shelves that we have all faced. So we did a bit of a case study into this to find what was the cause of the shortages that we've experienced. The bulk buying, the mass buying, was produced by just 6% of Australians who bought much more than they needed. That's amazing, isn't it? It shows the finely tuned supply chain that we have going on in Australia in our supermarkets. It's not geared up for mass buying. And you just had 6% of consumers strategically bulk buying certain items, and it threw the whole system out. Months later, it's only just getting back to some level of normality. That 6% that bought much more than needed, that threw the system out, that perhaps you would say were thinking of just themselves and not others. So very small percentage, and I think it's important we keep that in mind. But that 6% that stockpiled led another 30% to buy a bit more than they did. Right, the panic buying, or it's disappearing, I better go and get it, and that blew out the whole system. So it does show the asymmetrical influence of small numbers, and we need to keep that in mind with our own planning in our businesses, but also keep in mind that 2/3 of Australians felt the pain by the 1/3 that went out and overbought. We asked this question about what should be the response, and Australians are not in favour of government mandates or restrictions around purchasing limits. 94% said Australians should not be able to buy as much as they want. We all agree that people should self-manage, and self-manage is the solution. Just 38% said that shops should place limits. Even fewer said that government should. So we do value the market mechanism in responding to these situations, even as frustrating as they can be. So lifestyle impacts, what are we experiencing there? Well, loneliness is one of the key challenges that Australians are feeling at the moment. And again, we see generational differences. It's almost twice that in the younger generation than the older, that are concerned about increased loneliness and its mental health impacts. 1 in 4 of the older generations, the baby boomers and the builders generation, are feeling that, compared to 2 in 5 of those in their 20s. When we asked about the resilience of the Aussie spirit at this time, we found that overall we're traveling pretty well. But as you can see from this graph, we are most exposed from a financial perspective. That's where there is the least resilience, is financially, with our current income and expenses. And you've only got 30% of Australians feeling extremely or very resilient financially, 7 in 10 are less so. When it came to the physical resilience, now we've got nearly 40% feeling extremely or very resilient, and emotional health, we've got almost 50% feeling extremely or very resilient. So good going there, but it does mean half of Australians are not feeling very mentally resilient. And the longer this goes on, the more we'll have to keep that as a watch area and keep an eye out on others around that. Interestingly, when we broke down by generation, that while the younger generations are the most resilient when it comes to finance compared to the older generations, and also a physical sense, feeling healthier than the older generations. And that's what we know. You know, as this impacts on superannuation and retirement savings, it's those that are older and reliant on that the most impacted. The younger ones have longer in their working life to bounce back from the financial challenge of this. And physically, we know it's impacting the older more than the younger. But the younger, as I said, were less emotionally resilient than the older generations. So something like resilience impacts the generations differently, and we need to keep in mind how those impacts play out across our families, communities, and our teams as well. Well, there are challenges amidst this self-isolation, but there are opportunities as well. And I found this fascinating, that we've got here 1 in 3 Australians say they've used this time to benefit themselves in terms of more reading, more creative pursuits, more baking at home. Aussies have conducted more cooking. They've been creative in using those ingredients at the back of the pantry. They've saved a lot of money amidst this period. So there have certainly been some upsides to it. I like that 1 in 4 have jumped online to learn a new skill in this time, and 1 in 5 have reported stronger connections within their households as they have moved off the screens for their recreational time. Having spent the whole day on screens for work, as they work from home or indeed learn online, in the downtime, they're looking to not use screens. It's the opposite of what we've traditionally seen. You know, people get home from work or study, they go to the screens. Not in COVID. They're trying to get off the screens. They're dusting off the old board games to play with families. Jigsaw puzzles have made a resurgence. People have found the cross stitch in the bottom drawer, got back into it. And of course, family games, nights, activities in the backyard, and indeed a bit of gardening has all had a resurgence at this time. And I think that will continue. This slower pace of life that we've had now for 2 months, I think will be extended. Australians are looking back on it and experiencing it now. And they're saying, you know what, this was the slowdown that I needed. And I think we will see some resetting of priorities even as we move post-COVID. And that is a healthy thing. So what are the top responses or innovations we've had to this virus at a household level? Number 1, people being resourceful with ingredients and eating more at home. Meal planning so that they can shop less. Suddenly, a shopping list and the meals plan has become a thing that we hadn't seen for some decades. So we're not just doing the top-up shop every other day, but doing the trolley filler less frequently. Finding creative ways to exercise at home. And much of that will continue. And again, managing those costs on a weekly basis as people do a lot more of the DIY rather than just outsource a lot of those services. Shopping online rather than in store. Supporting small businesses and shopping local has been a great thing. And for those of us that are running businesses where we're connecting locally, what a great thing. People have changed the circles of their life and they're traveling shorter distances rather than across town to buy things. Using technology to maintain social connection with colleagues, family, and friends. And I think we'll continue to see technology being used for the best in terms of connecting. We've seen how Zoom can work. We've seen how webinars like this can work. And we've seen how we can connect even through technology. And we'll see the best of the social aspect of technology into the future. Here's what someone said in the research. Because we're in self-isolation, we can't go for our usual long walks. So I've been trying to exercise as much as possible at home. I've also been emailing and instant messaging people a lot more. I'm trying out different recipes to use up ingredients that have been sitting in the cupboard for a while. This person's summing up some of those key trends. So we said in the report, a key characteristic of a leader is foresight. The reason they can lead is that they see things not just as they are, that as they will be. So what's a sense of that, and what we need to bring forth as leaders in this time? Well, to understand the Aussie characteristics and to bring the best from our teams at this time, we asked Australians this question then: what aspects of the Aussie spirit have you seen in this pandemic? And have a look at this: 41% say they've seen Aussie humour at play. We've seen the memes doing the rounds. We've seen Aussies say, if you don't laugh, you'll cry. So let's bring an optimistic spirit to what we're seeing. And that Aussie humour has played out strongly. Now, you Queenslanders are leading the charge here. More than half of all Queenslanders have seen the Aussie sense of humour amidst this challenge, compared to just a third of those in the southern states of Victoria and New South Wales. Coming together in times of need is the second Aussie characteristic that we've seen, that community mindedness, that sense of mateship. Well, this third one, keeping things in perspective. We do that as Aussies. She'll be right. We'll get through it. No problem. Resilience and creative problem solving we've seen. Not taking things too seriously, that no worries attitude. Optimism. Yeah, we're the lucky country. Yet again, we're seeing that. We might say we're the blessed country, and our results around COVID are phenomenal. And mateship and the community spirit has come through very strongly as well. Now, I thought I'd share just a brief case study of a situation in a previous health crisis. It was the 1800s, the mid 1800s, and they were dark days in England as there was another cholera outbreak taking place. Let me share with you Jon Snow, and I'm not talking about this Jon Snow for those Game of Thrones fans. I'm talking about Jon Snow on the left there, Dr. Jon Snow. He was an epidemiologist and a doctor, physician that was at the forefront of looking into what was behind cholera. Now, back then in 19th century London, they didn't realize that cholera was a waterborne illness. They thought it was from foul air. They used to say the miasma theory dominated. And so when there was an outbreak, they would get out the fire hoses, as this image shows, and they would hose down those streets and buildings to create, clean air. Well, that, of course, just spread infected water further, getting into drinking supplies and so creating outbreaks. Well, there were dark days in September 1854 in Soho, London, as another cholera outbreak took hold. And within just a couple of days, there were dozens of deaths. Well, Jon Snow wanted to get to the bottom of this because he doubted this miasma theory. He had a feeling that it was waterborne. And so he wanted to go and look at where the outbreak was centered. And he produced this, the world's first infographic, this little dot diagram as he had the map of London and would put a stroke where each death was recorded. But have a look at that dot for a moment in the map. That is where the local Anglican church was located, where Reverend Henry Whitehead was the pastor, the minister there. And he had the local knowledge and was the one that was able to take Jon Snow around to find where those deaths have occurred and record it. Jon Snow wasn't from that part of London. He didn't have the local knowledge and he didn't know the local residents. It was the local reverend, the good Harry Whitehead, that was able to take him around. And I guess it's just a great example of where the local knowledge, the local leaders can have a voice and an impact to bring about outcomes that can save lives in such times. I put a little box around the epicenter there, and you'll see right in the center of where most of those deaths occurred there, highlighted, is a pump, a street pump, and there's a photo of it. It stands to this very day on that in that particular part of Soho, London, on Broad Street. I had the chance of going there just late last year, and prior to this information that the good doctor was able to highlight, they still believed in this theory of foul air, and so many more people died. Let me read to you what John Snow wrote on this, having got to the very centre of this outbreak. On proceeding to the spot, I found that nearly all the deaths had taken place within a short distance of the Broad Street pump. There were only 10 deaths in houses situated decidedly near another street pump. In 5 of those cases, the families of the deceased persons informed me that they always sent for water from the Broad Street pump. In the other cases, the deceased were children who went to school near the Broad Street pump. With regard to the other deaths, I found the reasons that they used the water from the Broad Street pump. The result of this inquiry then is that there have been no particular outbreak or prevalence of cholera in any part of London except from persons who were drinking from the above mentioned pump. I had an interview with the Board of Guardians of St James Parish on the evening of the 7th of September and represented the above circumstances to them. In consequence of what I said, the handle of the pump was removed on the following day. And from the 8th of September, 1854, the epidemic came to an end. The solution was found, and it was shown that water was the problem. There was cracks in that pump or in the pipes around the pump, which was spreading that disease and causing the deaths. It's estimated that by removing the pump as a result of that infographic that Dr. Snow, with the help of Reverend Whitehead, was able to produce, it saved hundreds of lives in that outbreak alone and many thousands thereafter. You know, pre-1854, these were the messages that were put up on the streets when there was a cholera outbreak: avoid raw vegetables, avoid ardent spirits, and don't sleep or sit in a draught of air. But from that day on, the new posters read cholera and water. Do not drink any water which has not previously been boiled. So as leaders with local knowledge in our communities, we can make a difference, like the local reverend there connecting up with the epidemiologist. That's the sort of vision we need for our communities at such a time. So let me finish with a few insights for us as leaders as we think about the future of work. WFH has become a new 3-letter acronym in this time: working from home. It has been the universal experience over the last couple of months, and Australians have adapted well to it. More than 3 in 5 Australians, or just on 3 in 5, say that they agree that their job allows them to work from home. 7 in 10 say that their home is well equipped for them to work from home. And when we asked Australians, do you want more of this? 7 in 10 said that they're excited to spend more time in the future working from home. Almost 7 in 10 say that they are as productive when working from home, if not more productive, than when they work at the office. So all of this points to the fact that Australians are not only well equipped for it and up for it, they think they can do it very well in the future and they want more of it. So working from home is not just a current get by strategy, it will be much more of the normal. I put up here some data around working from home as well, where almost 8 in 10 say that it will be the new normal. So as business leaders, we need to start to respond to that. It won't be all of our teams all their days working from home, but maybe a couple in the team, a day or two a week or a day or two a fortnight, will become more normative and will become the expectation. We'll see, therefore, office floor prints shrink a little, as about 20% of our teams at any one point are working off-site. We will see some costs be managed or constrained in that new environment. We'll see a lot more online learning as well, both work-wise and school and tertiary. In fact, you can see from our research here, almost 9 in 10 Australians are positive about increased learning, whether it be vocational or university or schools, but learning online. So let me give you a few final tips to keep in mind as we lead in these unprecedented times. 3 key tips. Number 1, build culture intentionally. If this is something of the new normal, remote teams working off-site and managing them in a WFH environment, then it means that we've got to make sure we're building that culture and that connection, because people are more separated. You know, the bump interactions that we have in a normal work day, the quick office conversations as we're making a cuppa or filling up the water bottle, you know, that we all miss out on when we work from home. So we have to intentionally build that collegiality and that social interaction. We wrote in the report that to many, work is simply a job, but to many more, it's a lifeline to social interaction, purpose, and a place of belonging. And so from a pastoral perspective, we've got to keep that in mind. Look out for our teams in an increasingly remote working environment, build the culture and the relationship through these technologies that we're using right now. Number two, continue to invest in training. That is going to be key. Now, it's not going to be the offsite conference. It's not going to be the full day training in a boardroom, but we're still going to need to invest in that training through online or one-on-one or other forms that we can. We wrote in our report this: to remain employable, workers will need to develop a habit of refreshing existing skills and adding new ones. The world is changing fast. The key tools are innovation and adaptation. It'll never be the speed of change that's so fast now will never be this slow again, as we said. And so what is key is ongoing training so that we can adapt to the new circumstances and we can remain ever relevant and future-proofed. So let's invest in continued training for our teams and for ourselves. And my third takeaway here, use this time as an opportunity to innovate. You know, we've got the chance with things we're working to get rid of them, to try out new things at this time, to adapt our business services and offerings. The ABS data on this shows that most businesses already have adapted their services or their products to respond to this new market, and we need to do that as well. We wrote in the report, the success of a leader is measured not by what they achieve in their tenure, but by what they set in motion. And that is key, isn't it? To start to set up systems, processes, and procedures that can live on after the COVID crisis, that can even live on when we've moved on to a new role or circumstance. Understand that the future will be hybrid, as I've said. 7 in 10 say that culture is at its best with everyone working in the one place as an ideal, but with increasing flexibility for remote working. So I think that will be our future. Not everyone connecting virtually, not all of us every day in the office, but a mix of both. And if we can build the culture in that context, continue training that context, and make sure we're innovating services and our leadership styles, then that's going to set us up well for the future. Thought I'd leave the final quote to Winston Churchill, who knew something about managing through crises. And he said, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. So let's use this crisis, tough as it is, to innovate, adapt, to build the best in our team, to set them up for wins in the future, to set them up for what will be something of the new normal. There's a lot more in the report, which you can download here. I wish you all the best in it, and I'm sure you will thrive in your leadership through these unprecedented times.
Mark, there's so much value in there. Like, that's like drinking from a fire hose. That is so much gold. And you covered so many areas. I mean, I've got 2 pages of notes for myself as you've been presenting here. That was amazing. I like those little points that you made pretty early on. 2/3 of businesses are down, only 4% are up, and 1/3 have already negotiated leases and things like that, which is some cold hard stats. I really like the comment about leadership. You rattled through a few. One of them was they need to make tough calls early, and I just wonder, as you're sitting there, what do you think for the small business owner might they be? Like, what may be some of those tough calls that they should make sooner rather than later? Have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, the calls we make now will be remembered in the good times. So we don't want to do anything that might be punitive, that might be over the top, that might be opportunistic in terms of cutting back staff that we don't need to, or rewards and incentives or earnings that we don't need to. But of course, business survival in the long term is key. And so we have to make the tough calls for survival reasons, and everyone will appreciate that because, when the ship is filling with water, we've got to do the bailing out. Otherwise, all is lost. And that's important. So it's walking the fine line between the two. And I think if we can get the cash flow sorted, if we can right size the organization so that we've got everyone fully functional and working hard, and we there might be some earnings adjustments, but we get that right. Then we can, I think, start to invest in with an eye on the recovery in not only our team and their performance, and now's a great time to do that training and investment if the workflow is slowing down a bit, but importantly investing in those clients so that we're building that loyalty and goodwill and that'll come on afterwards. So, I think now is the time to scrap a few of those things that may be marginal. Now's the time to right size some of our business expenses if we need to renegotiate leases, if the floor plan is too large, if we've got some, if we're thinking of making investments that now we think we don't need, then now's the time to pull back from those because it's cash flow preservation. That is key at this point. And we don't know how long the tail's going to last. We don't know where we're at in the dip. You saw the the ASX chart earlier. That looks a little bit like a V, but it might be looking a bit more like a U. So how long before we recover? We need to have cash in hand and have some powder dry, if you like, to utilize in the future. So I'd say take a conservative view, make the calls you need to make for business survival, but don't get too down to the wire on it all in terms of being punitive that might cause blowback if we're too harsh with clients or demanding of the payments or indeed on our staff as well.
Yeah, very good. You also said that in terms of leadership, and I really like this. Leaders are you just start leading with vision, pictures, stories. You're a team of 17 from your website, but it could be different today. But that's what's represented there. How did you navigate that? What kind of stories? Like, give us some intel on how you navigated that when this was happening. You put your team together. How did you cast that vision?
Well, when we saw how it was impacting, as we all saw, the society and households first from a health perspective, and then within days it was the business to customer businesses, coming to a halt from the hairdressers to the restaurants and cafes. And then we saw, wow, second wave is the B2B, which we are in as business to business. And so we knew we had to start to make some adjustments. We called our whole team in, team leaders firstly, but then our whole team, and we said, we're going to make some tough calls here. And we did put it to our team as we saw revenues dry up, as we saw the forecasts under pressure around our earnings and what we might have to do around our hours and what we might have to do there as well, and around some of our offerings, just to get back to core for the moment so that we can focus on the fundamentals, get through the storm, and then we can look to the future. And we, I guess, tried to put into practice those points of leadership I said, and we had full agreement and support of our team. We were as one on that. Everyone agreed, there's going to be pain for us all. Let's bear the pain together. Let's get through this. And I, hats off to my team that were prepared to, and invested in the business enough to say, we're with you on it, and let's go. And they stepped forward and have worked more productively than ever, more focused than ever to get us through to this point. And so, all of those things that we said, being clear and honest, sharing the trajectory, opening the books, showing the forecast, showing the finances, and why we all have to, bear through this in terms of hours, dollars, or effort, and they all stepped up and have helped us weather it. And then importantly, as we've been doing, you go back to the team and you say, look, if we're in challenging times we've got all bear a bit of pain for a couple of weeks or a couple of paychecks, or these incentives are now off the table, we need to then go back to them to share with the books and with an update on how we're going, because they're now owners in it. They've shared in the pain. They need to share in the rewards and in the knowledge and the information as well. And we've been transparent in that sense as well. So I would say that is key for us all as business leaders, to perhaps be more transparent than we ordinarily would, and to be more candid and open in these times. And I think that's healthy anyway, as leaders with the next generation who expect that sort of candor.
I like the way the team have stepped up. I mean, mine too. It's like you do realize, team, that you've just set the new standard, right? Like this is now the new normal, right? Everyone's focused and doing a good job. So they've kind of created a rod for their own back in a small way. The opportunities ahead of us for the kingdom, right? The gospel, right? There's charities and not-for-profits that are struggling. There's a world that is scared, with that trend ahead of us. What are your thoughts on what some of the things that a kingdom business person can do, or the kingdom business movement can do, to help advance the kingdom of God at a time like this?
Yeah. Well, how we act in a crisis is how we'll be remembered in the good times, in the recovery. And I think that's true as leaders in our businesses. And so, as I said, be as generous as we can, be as open as we can, be as supportive as we can. And that will long be remembered. When the good times roll on, and then if there's been no loyalty shown in the tough times, there's going to be no loyalty when suddenly the job offers open up. People will be out the door in a heartbeat and won't give any respect. So respect when it's given will be rewarded. And I think that that's true for us in our community as well, from a gospel perspective. Christians, like we saw case studied there with Reverend Whitehead, ought to be the ones who are serving the community most, because we have that vision for our communities, who ought to be the ones who are leading by example at the tough times, who I think ought to be the ones who are leading with confidence and not showing fear, who can step out and say, we're not going to be intimidated by this virus. I mean, if faith means anything, it's got to be lived out and shown in our daily life. We serve a good God. He is still on the throne, COVID or not. We continue on. We don't jettison our values, jettison our care for others or our community or our giving or our support for our churches or our volunteering or any other commitment. In fact, we double down. And that gets noted by our communities. When everyone else is bunkering down, hopefully it's Christians who are serving. When everyone else is worried about their own health, hopefully it's Christians who are concerned about others. It's the good Aussie trait that we have, that mateship and care for others, but I think it's even more the realm of Christians who walk in the footsteps of Christ and live in an other-minded way. We're seeing incredible fruit at this time. I'm sure we've all seen the numbers of people tuning into online church around the place, who are accessing these online Christian services, who are looking for a sense of faith and resilience themselves, and have found that their own sense of optimism or their finances or what they have rested their hopes in haven't delivered at this time, and to say, well, maybe I ought to explore something of the things of God. And so in the tough times, we see Christians thrive, and we see the gospel, the good news, be ever more well received. And I'm sure we're all seeing that. And for such a time as this, what a great opportunity.
Yeah, that's so good. Hey, if somebody's watching and they want to reach out to you, have you got a couple of handles or maybe some URLs that people can? We'll display the links for your research, but just you as a company and you as a person, where can somebody go?
Yeah, definitely. We try as much as is possible with all the research we do to put it freely up and available on our website. And so you'll find on our blog, if you go to mccrindle.com.au, you can access all of our blogs and reports and infographics, those visual portrayals of information. We've got a few sub-brands as well for different sections or business or industry sectors that you can grab hold of as well. I mentioned Analyze Australia. .com.au, which has that COVID-19 report. Education Future.com.au is for educators and school. We do a lot of research into how to communicate and educate the next generation. And AustralianCommunities.com.au is where we put up all of our research into not-for-profits and giving in Australia. And so for any NFPs, some great resources there.
So good. Hey, have you got a final thought? There'll be a whole bunch of Christian small businesses watching this. Have you got a final thought for them, Mark?
Well, I mentioned the phrase, and I might repeat it here with the context of Esther. There she was, living the good life in the throne room with the king, and a crisis came. People were at risk, and there was an evil plan afoot to kill many, and she was wavering, do I put things on the line for this? I mean, I got the good life in the court here, and her wise cousin Mordecai said, hey, Esther, for such a time as this, you've got this opportunity. You're in the throne room. You can influence the king. You can make a difference. You can turn things around. And she stepped out, took the risk, and did. And people were saved. And I would say for such a time as this, we as business owners and leaders are in these positions of influence, of resource, of organizational opportunity to make a difference for our teams, for our clients, for our communities, and beyond. For such a time as this, as Winston Churchill said, let's not waste a crisis. Let's use it for the kingdom. Let's use it for good. Let's use it for others to make a difference. And by God's grace, I'm sure we can do that. And I wish all of you the very best in achieving that outcome.
Mate, you're such a blessing. Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate it. You've got a whole team there. You've got a busy schedule, and you've given an hour or so over to us. So I just want to say thank you on behalf of everybody that watches it. Thank you. It was a real blessing. And
well, thanks, Wez, for what you do. A great delight. Thanks, Wez. Keep it up and keep up the kingdom business work. Appreciate it.
When we can travel, I'll come down to Sydney and I'll take you for lunch, eh?
Awesome. Thanks.
All right. Bless you, Mark. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate your time.